Good evening and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme this evening, India and the US, it now appears, are very, very close to a trade deal between the two countries. Remember, Donald Trump absolutely insistent that when it comes to trade, it has to be on terms acceptable to the United States. India's negotiators have been working extra time protecting what our interests are. But ultimately, it is in the interests of both countries to pursue a trade deal that really takes forward the economic relationship between the two countries. The targets that Washington and New Delhi have selected are huge, but a trade deal, if it does work out, would go a long way towards fulfilling that ambition. It does appear at this stage that the deal is all but signed. Once it does go through, it could be a game changer. On this program, some of the finest minds looking out at the prospects of a trade deal between Washington and New Delhi. Well, in just a couple of days, there is a real hope, a real expectation that India and the United States can thrash out a trade deal. It's been in the works now for several months, with the US president making it clear that there has to be a real deal, one which works. He says in favor of the United States, but obviously India would want it to work equally well for New Delhi. Joining us, somebody who's really worked at the diplomatic relationship between India and the United States, and that certainly includes the trade relationship as well, Ambassador Atul Keshav. Thanks very much, Ambassador, for being with us. Namaste to you. So right up off the top, let's talk about some of the tough issues. Agriculture, for example. Why is agriculture such a major sticking point in the negotiations? I ask because America seeks greater access for agricultural products like corn, soya bean, wheat, etc., dairy particularly, modified crops. But India has problems because, for example, in the case of genetically modified crops, there are legal concerns here. India also has concerns over 80 million small farmers, smallholder farmers, cultural sensitivities around dairy. Could this be a potential deal breaker towards a really big deal?
So, Vishnu, great to see you. Thank you for having me on. Look, for the whole time that I've observed trade deals and trade negotiations, back to my time as a college student and when I was the U.S. envoy for APEC, agriculture issues are always the most sensitive issues in any trade negotiation. And this is because farmers occupy an enormously important cultural space in all of our countries. And look at the Japanese rice farmers, for example. And farming and agriculture hit very close to the home and the hearth. And these are also extremely very important political constituencies. So, of course, the trade negotiation with regard to any agricultural issues will be the most sensitive. However, there is virtue in having these conversations. And I would just add that it's been years since we've last been in a serious trade negotiation. We came close about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm hoping that this time we'll bring it over the line. Certainly, USIBC and all of our member companies are cheering, as is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We are hoping for a meaningful trade deal between the world's two greatest democracies. So agriculture will, of course, be sensitive. It always is in any country that we deal with. But it should get done. There is virtue in coming to a reasonable outcome that is good for both countries.
So you are genuinely optimistic that this is not a major stumbling block going forward?
Well, look, I mean, this is up to the negotiators, right? And it's up to their bosses who make the final decisions. You know, as I understand it, this is just the first in what could be a series of trade agreements between the United States and India. And Vishnu, just panning out, think about all of the intelligence, law enforcement, counterterrorism, outer space, scientific agreements that have come since the nuclear deal between the United States and India. We just agreed a new 10-year defense framework between the U.S. and India during Minister Jaishankar's visit here the other day. And think about the absolute paucity of economic agreements between the U.S. and India, almost zero, with the sole and notable exception of the 2005 Open Skies Treaty. So I am very hopeful, as someone who has watched and tried to see this relationship grow for a long time, I am very hopeful that the negotiators will be able to come to some form of agreement that allows us to create a pathway and a foundation for even more such talks and even more such agreements. So as you structure negotiations, sometimes you can put the difficult things off a little bit and agree on what's available right now and possible right now.
So in simple terms, to break through your very carefully calibrated language, we're looking at a mini deal and not a mega deal, right?
Well, let's see what comes out. As I said, this is a very sensitive negotiation. It involves both sides stretching their comfort zones. It is, I think, extremely important strategically for the United States and India to have a trade agreement, no matter what it may look like. I think that our shared adversaries are watching and hoping that we fail. We cannot fail. We must succeed. We are compelled by the geostrategic turbulence of the moment to ensure that we send a strong signal to the entire world that the U.S. and India are still working to build their relationship. Indeed, if you look at Prime Minister Modi and President Trump's aspiration that we hit $500 billion in bilateral trade, we are far short of the mark.
Yeah.
So this deal, I feel, has to happen, and I pray that it will happen, and I think that it'll be the first of many to come.
So India faces a potential 26% reciprocal tariff from the US. That's been paused, of course, till the 9th. But India's offer to reduce tariffs to zero on 60% of American imports and then seek exemptions for our exports, for example, textiles, pharma, that is India's key bargaining chip. But the US insistence is on reciprocity. So it really depends on how you're looking at it, right? India sees this as an opportunity for America. America says, no, look, there has to be reciprocity. So do you not see this as being something that complicates the progress that you're talking about?
Well, look, every single element of this negotiation has to come to a point where both sides feel that they can sell it to their people and that they're comfortable with it, right? These trade negotiators are deeply experienced people. They are great patriots who love their countries, and they will work to strike the best possible deal for the advancement of their own country's national economic interests. And that's got to go in both directions until a deal is struck. And every time I've ever been in a negotiation with anyone, Russians, Chinese, Indians, Europeans, Arabs, there always comes a point where everybody gets very frustrated and sort of takes a deep breath and then realizes that success is the only option. And then you push through with reasonable compromise and you strike a deal. A good deal, well negotiated, is one where nobody's jubilant and nobody's crestfallen and everybody walks away feeling, okay, maybe this is the beginning of something. And if we can come to that point between the two negotiators, then I think when it goes to the leaders for decision, maybe the people of both sides will realize that this is a good pathway for much more to come. For instance, if we can agree a deal on tariffs, as you mentioned, or on other elements related to non-tariff barriers and market access, maybe it will then create confidence for the two of us to start working really seriously on immunizing our supply chains from risk, on things like critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, defense articles, semiconductors. There's a lot of work yet to do between the US and India. So I wish that this deal come through because it will create a very important psychological impact among investors, in both countries, among citizens, among the two governments, and among, frankly, all of the people who watch us all around the world, including some who mean us harm.
So China, right?
Your words.
All right. We'll talk about China because it is an interesting factor in terms of the broader relationship. But America prioritizes digital trade, pushing for fewer restrictions on data flows and competition regulations, which is what Indian policies limit to a large extent. Our focus in India has been on data sovereignty, protecting our digital market. But do you believe that this is again an area where a lot more needs to be done to break through differences to achieve significant economic gains?
I actually think we've come a long way together in the just the last few years. India came out with a very interesting formula a few years ago that it would allow data on Indians to be stored in trusted geographies.
Yeah.
We all know what that means. And I think that India and the US have also learned the lesson from our European friends who overregulated their digital economy and frankly chased away innovation in Europe. The thing about the digital economy is you don't have to pick up a factory and move it. You just move the talent and you move the data and you move the innovation. And so the United States and India have remained hothouses for innovation. You have all of these Bengaluru unicorns, and of course you have the Silicon Valley in the United States, precisely because I think our regulators are very careful not to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And the US and India are leaders in the digital economy. I think we are very proud of that, and we want to keep it going. So on these issues of data, on security, sovereignty, we're literally building the world that has never existed before. It's kind of like coming up with all the traffic regulations after automobiles became a thing. You know, it took years and years to figure out what made sense. And we're in that process now, but both governments are very clear about not wanting to squelch innovation.
Do you believe that trade needs to be linked to geopolitical concerns which India and America jointly face in different contexts? I'm talking, yes, about China. Or do you believe that linking trade to geopolitics complicates negotiations and puts all sorts of pressures, perhaps even domestic political pressures, certainly in the context of a country like India?
So I studied economics in college, and if you study the principles of David Ricardo and Adam Smith and all of the great free traders, free trade actually makes the most sense. It is the most efficient, it is the most logical, it strives to attain the greatest comparative advantage, it maximizes happiness of producers and citizens and countries. And so free trade as a theology, it makes a lot of sense, and it works. The problem is reality. And this is where ideologies like communism fall down. They run into human nature. And so when you are dealing with free riders in the international system who are creating advantages for themselves to create pinches and restraints and concerns and limits for other people, that's when you start having to get into trade policy. And nations have to think about the strategic layer. And on the 4 or 5 supply chain issues I mentioned earlier, we have to get really serious about these things. So I do believe in free trade. I do believe in zero tariffs. I do believe in maximum comparative advantage. But we also have to live with the world as it is and recognize that some of our adversaries really mean to put us in a subordinate economic position.
And so a final question, and I do realize it's speculative, just a couple of days down, do you believe that we'll see an interim deal which focuses on tariff cuts for, let's say, industrial goods, energy, and select agricultural products, not all, and that's something that can be seen to be, a win for both sides, but that ultimately we're going to have to wait for a long period of time before we see anything further in, let's say, dairy and agriculture?
Well, who's to say? I mean, I think the U.S. and India actually recognize the strategic imperatives that are out there, and they recognize that they have to work hard to push against those. This trade agreement is very important. It is taking up from what was attempted in Trump 1. I'm very happy that we are negotiating. It gives me great joy. For many, many decades of my career, there was no real meaningful trade negotiation between the U.S. and India. Indeed, it was mostly trade recriminations. So I am quite optimistic and hopeful. The U.S. Chamber is, the U.S.-India Business Council, our 200-member companies are wishing both governments great success, not only in whatever this agreement is going to be, but in many, many economic agreements that we still need to ink based on catching up for the lost time over the past few decades.
All right, Ambassador Atul Keshav, great speaking to you. Let's hope something comes off this deal. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishnu. Happy 4th of July.
Yep, thank you, and happy 4th of July too.